VTuber logos tend to be really bad. At least that's what this tweet by VTuber and designer Simone Mello pointed out recently. It started a huge discussion about traditional logos versus logos for VTubers all over Twitter, which kind of culminated in this trend of VTuber logo designers remaking logos of international brands in VTuber style, and a general consensus that the traditional rules of design shouldn't apply to the VTuber sphere. But is this true? I'm Loie, and when I'm not VTubing, I work as a full-time lead designer. I have a degree in graphic design from a top art school, and I've worked in brand and user experience design for all of my professional career, both in the US and in Europe. To explain why designers are feeling a little weird about VTuber logos, I'm going to talk about 5 pivotal moments in the history of modern design and how understanding them could help us analyze the modern-day VTuber logo. Through this, you'll learn a little bit more about 1. Where VTuber logos fall in the history of design and why it makes designers a little concerned. 2. Common design principles that should be considered when designing a VTuber logo. 3. What you should be looking out for as a customer who might be commissioning someone. And 4. Honestly, if any of this even matters, but we'll get to that. But before you get started, please click the like button or I'll criticize your logo in this video. And that wouldn't be very nice because I didn't ask for permission. Don't worry, I'm kidding. But please do watch until the end because I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these conclusions. So the first era we'll be going over is the invention of the printing press and type foundries. Way back in the year 1440, this is basically right at the beginning of the Renaissance, the first movable type printing press was invented in Europe. This means that different letters in different configurations could be placed in this press and be used to print out books. This made books a lot more available than back in the day when people had to do them by hand. However, most people couldn't read, so these books are still for the elite and people in power. And because of this, they wanted them to be really nice. That is when type foundries were born. These were basically shops where designers fine-tuned the details of letters and how they fit together, and they developed all over Europe. And depending on the year and the trend, printing presses would buy them and use them for different books. One fun fact is actually that movable type was invented in China about 1200 years before this, but due to the complexity of their alphabet, the same kind of popularity and development of foundries didn't really come from it. Anyway, the way these fonts were drawn, made, and spaced out was passed down from one designer to another. And a lot of these fonts are actually kind of things we use today. And even new fonts trace their lineage to a lot of these. So this gives society a kind of optical blueprint for what letters should look like. Not only that, but the way they might fit together in this pleasing way, it didn't just happen. It was actually invented over time and developed through the centuries. Along with letters, other types of characters could be added to a printing press. This includes ornaments like little flowers and things, but also printer's marks, which were like bold shapes. But does this have anything to do with VTuber logos? Let's back up for a second. Close your eyes. Now imagine you're a ballet dancer. Stay with me, I promise. I have a point. You've been training for years. Not only that, but you've learned and experienced how ballet has changed over time, and you yourself are practicing to stay relevant while carrying on the tradition of everything great that you've learned. You're out and about one day when you see a stage where a ballerina is about to perform. You don't really know who this ballerina is, so you don't have high expectations. This isn't the Royal Ballet, but you'd stay by and watch because you'd love to see some ballet. The ballerina comes out in pointe shoes and the most elaborate tutu. Not only that, but her makeup is done extravagantly. So you're really ready to see what's in store. But when the dance starts, something is very wrong. It's a dance you know, and while what she's doing could be correct if you were half asleep without your glasses on, something isn't right. She's following all the right steps, but only in the most general sense. She's having trouble supporting herself on her toes. Clearly, she hasn't really worn these shoes before, and her feet aren't arched in the way they should be. At this point in the dance, she's supposed to be doing pirouettes, but she can't stand on one foot, so she's just tiptoeing in a circle. It's clear that she kind of knows this dance, but clearly she hasn't learned the fundamentals of ballet. You can tell that people aren't crazy impressed with the dance scene. However, a lot of them are commenting that her timing's good and she looks so beautiful. But inside you're going, is this even ballet? So this is kind of how it feels for me to look at a lot of VTuber logos. While the general moves of a logo design are happening, the fundamentals aren't, which are basic understanding of letter forms and how they fit together nicely. And because these have been around for so long and are the foundation of how our fonts have developed in the Western world, most people have grown up looking at them. Even if the everyday person isn't really able to tell you what's wrong with a piece of typography, there's always something below the surface that kind of tells you if a design just feels better than another. Kind of like seeing a business logo done by a professional agency versus one done by maybe the owner's nephew. Just like how non-artists are drawn to art that has nicer anatomy, even though they might not know how anatomy works. Setting type in a successful way is a really hard thing to learn. It's just like anatomy, it's about training your eye. And designing these letters itself is even harder, which is kind of something you need to know when you're doing logo design, because often you will have to redraw certain letters to make them stand out or work in a certain way. To do this, you really need to learn how letters are constructed. In the VTuber community, I often see a lot of illustrators turned designers compensate visually for their lack of type knowledge by adding a lot of nice and beautiful illustrations, and there's nothing wrong with decoration on a logo. Even in the days of letterpress, like drop caps, ornamentation, those were all a huge thing. But if it doesn't look good without these extra flourishes, there's just something wrong in the middle of it, just like my example of the ballet dancer. Luckily, we are in the days of the internet. You don't have to go to a fancy school to get some of this knowledge. There's a lot of courses, even for free online, where you can learn about typography and letters. You can pick up a book or even watch YouTube channels that give you so much info about letters and the way they're drawn. I recommend starting with absorbing some of this info. But no matter how much you watch, actually practicing it is key. In school, we learn to develop this eye by doing a lot of design and then putting it in front of people who have a better eye. As they point out things that are wrong to us, we start to see and understand what's really making things work. But again, you do not have to be in school to have this. There's a ton of free places online, like a huge community on Reddit, and also people who offer design tutoring that would give you that feedback. Critique is not always the most fun, but in a detail-oriented practice like design or, as I said, ballet, you need somebody correcting you and pointing out what you're doing wrong so you too can develop that eye, and this will allow you to grow and do such cool things with design. Now we move to our second era, which is early modernism and the Bauhaus. In the early 1900s, we were experiencing a large shift in the world, from the era of kings and empires and the elite to a world of more democratized information, industrial development, and modernization, and all these huge changes. Out of this came art movements that sought to throw away decoration, detail, and even recognizable forms like no more people, no more animals, no nothing. People are breaking down art to its primary colors and shapes, analyzing the power of these things, and looking forward to a world where the everyday person not only could enjoy art, but it could be woven into their everyday lives. From this came a school called the Bauhaus in Germany. It focused its efforts on the idea of form following function in everyday design. That is to say, looking at how you can boil down the design of a font or even an object like an iron to really meet exactly what its function is. A lot of these ideas were actually brought over from Europe's interest in a lot of East Asian craftsmanship that valued streamlined, simple forms. Within this movement, typefaces became more simple, bold, and modernized for the everyday person to engage with. This is where a lot of modern typefaces you see today come from. And although it seems like I keep coming back to simplification, it wasn't really a strict rule. People were really just exploring what abstraction could be and what it could mean for art and design. And if it seems like early modern art couldn't help us with VTuber logo design at all, think again. In a world where there's so many VTuber logos and similar concepts, is there a way to make yours feel truly unique? Can a VTuber logo communicate itself in a bold way without adding so many details? Can a VTuber logo be visually clear, but still super unique and custom to that VTuber? The key may be being less literal with your designs. Being literal isn't inherently bad. It's often a shortcut that's taken that can lead to a logo being busy, not rescalable, and also something that probably has been done before for VTubers with similar concepts. There's a lot of interesting design moves that people don't make because they're trying to be as literal as possible. So instead of adding wings to this Corvid logo, what if the flourishes of the letters themselves resembled feathers? Or you could make the letters in the typeface spread far apart and be light to evoke a sense of weightlessness. Or you could use a font with really sharp angles spaced tightly to really mimic the harsh, sharp sounds of a Corvid's voice. But abstraction was not early modernism's only focus. Another huge one was public accessibility. And a lot of these VTuber logos are a little hard to read, but also maybe hard to even place or understand if you're outside of the VTuber community. Can it be something that is able to be read by people with color blindness or other types of low vision? There's actually so much that's been written about accessible design that you can find in the WCAG guidelines, which are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. If you Google it, so much helpful information. Number 3. After early modernism was an era of mid-century design and corporate branding. Rather than the experimentation and exploratory nature of the Bauhaus, this era was more about rules. Throughout the world, there was a want for calm, peace, and orderliness after the horrors of the war. This is the era where we got the concept of designing on a grid, or set structures to maintain consistency across design. This is also the era that brought us Helvetica, a typeface known for its clarity and neutrality. Here we get the concept of cohesive visual systems to encapsulate a brand, from colors to visual elements. Systems were modular, kind of like IKEA, so different parts were meant to work in different contexts and scales and environments. This is also where you start to see a lot of modern logos for brands. So when a lot of people think of graphic design, what they're thinking of is this mid-century modern corporate and public branding. This is where a lot of the rules we hear about design came into the mainstream. But rules and systems are totally counter to the fun energy of the Vtuber logo. When this debate came up, a lot of Twitter users said, we're not even really making a logo. We're making more like a movie or video game title. And that's true. These really aren't totally even logos. But in my opinion, if all you're getting is title art, you're being ripped off. One huge thing we can take away from mid-century modern design is its focus on modularity. How can its parts reshuffle to fit different contexts and situations? When you take a look at the logo for a movie, you might notice that it can actually be used in a lot of different contexts. One, as a visually interesting title card or the center of a poster, it might have a lot of shadows, detail, little illustrations like a lot of YouTuber logos do. Another, something more simplified to put maybe on merch that just needs a black and white design, or something like a website listing multiple movies where it needs to be more uniform. Between the kind of logo you'd see on a poster and one that you might want to, be able to list on a website, you might actually want to be removing some of those little detail-y elements. But also sometimes when you're printing stuff, ink just can't work that way. So the last thing you want is a kind of icon, like a little stamp that might fit in a square that you could put on a product, an app logo, or honestly anywhere with really, really limited space. In this debate, I saw some people on Twitter posting their logos in black and white to prove that it's readable in 2 colors. And that is a great first step, but you need to take it further. They shouldn't just be readable, they should look good. Anywhere from a fully rendered version, a flat color version, a black and white, with big detail for big instances, mid-level detail for lists and merch, and icons for whatever the heck else you might need them for. A logo in a traditional sense should come with all of these and work well in all these situations. It really makes me sad to see people commissioning these logos that if they end up wanting to release merch or do anything else with it, they might even need to commission a whole new design. If you make logos or if you commission them, you need to make sure that all these forms will exist. Otherwise, it's just not a fully working logo. If you're designing these, it can actually really help you improve as a designer because it can really strengthen the base of what this logo is. And also, you can and should charge more for it. And if you're a client, do not be afraid to request this and ask for examples. Onto our 4th era, postmodernism and the rise of MTV. In the late 70s, people were starting to question the formality and rules of graphic design as kind of mid-century modernists defined it. The rules worked, but everything had kind of started to look exactly the same. It had become a language to legitimize corporate branding and public signage, but what about style, creativity, different contexts? In this era, designers looked backward, forward, and even to the side. They looked at design of traditional letter forms and ornaments. They looked at what was working for modernist design. They looked at amateur and counterculture design and applied all of these to how they wanted to bring design into the future. The branding of MTV is a great example of this. It used the concept of a flexible system from the modernist era, but applied the art of counterculture and amateur design in a way that broke things and shook it up. The new way to judge design was if it was communicating right, not some set of arbitrary minimalist rules. A local laundromat using badly spaced Arial for its sign, it might communicate it's efficient, no nonsense, and probably doesn't cost that much. That might be the perfect logo for that business. In MTV's case, the use of a system showed viewers that it was still some kind of legitimate broadcast, but putting those rules on its head let viewers know that it was a network for rebels, free thinkers, artists, and people who just wanted to have fun. While these designers threw away the rules of the previous era, they didn't throw away the history. In fact, they learned about all this decoration that had been thrown away in the Bauhaus era and saw how it could be applied to modern design. When they made typography ugly, it was on purpose because they had learned what good typography looked like. Back to VTuber stuff, a lot of the backlash against this original tweet was people thinking that designers pointing out bad design meant that they thought anything that didn't look like Apple or Spotify's logo was ugly and terrible. But that's not the case, unless the designer you're talking to has been frozen in a block of ice since the 60s. With postmodern thought, there isn't just one kind of good design. VTuber logos don't totally need to change their style in order to be good. Their current style communicates many things that are really valuable. Number 1, that VTubers are fictional and fun. 2, that they might be similar to the anime and gaming world with their logos looking similar to those. And 3, that there is a kind of style so people see it and they recognize, okay, this style means VTuber. So in that way, they're really doing the job. However, there's also some things that they may unintentionally communicate. 1, your content is complex, maybe hard to follow, hard to see, a little inaccessible. 2, if the design feels a little amateur, that your content or stream may be amateur and scrappy, just like the example of the local laundromat. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think a lot of people get logos because they want a level of professionalism, so you need to think about that. Postmodern designers always think that a good design is based on what it's trying to communicate. In order to communicate the right message for the right situation, these designers still learned about history even when throwing away the rules. They knew which rule to use at which time. It's one thing to break the rules on accident. It's another to break them intentionally and with the right toolset in your pocket. And because these designers were referencing history, their designs sometimes got a lot more complex. And that isn't a bad thing. That's actually something that really defines the VTuber logo. But the way to make complexity work is clear hierarchy, which means the eye knows what to look at first, second, third, etc. Sometimes VTuber logos using a lot of decoration make those decorations bolder and louder than the actual words. Therefore, when somebody looks at it, they might just see a bunch of pictures before they even see the text. And making hierarchy clear can make something really complicated feel clean and professional. Color and contrast are probably the best ways to do this. So once you've done a design or received a design as a commission, I would try to unfocus your eyes and blur them and see which elements you're seeing first. And if everything looks kind of muddy, you may want to ask for more visual emphasis, using color to be put in certain places and less in others. Fifth and final, we come to critical design. It's what a lot of design thinkers are discussing today. It's design that's very meta in a sense, talking about what design is and what it means in our world. A lot of critical design is made for a fictional future to get us thinking about what might happen. Other pieces will collage, deconstruct, deface, or parody design as a way to get audiences thinking about design's role in our society, whether that be social, political, or economic. It forces us to think, what is design really doing? Where is it legitimizing people or powers in ways that we don't intend? And how can it be used to create a better future? And beyond this, it talks about the practice of design, often using very default layouts in a way to express a kind of undesignedness, because that's just how it comes out on the program. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting with VTuber logos. Let's talk about the designers reacting. Designers live in a scary and ever-changing world like the rest of us. But with the rise of Squarespace and Canva, there's a lot less work for your average designer to do with small clients, like VTubers. It's really hard to get a consistent income unless you are working with big brands or at an agency. Even these companies are cutting their workforce with the justification that AI can replace a lot of us. No one really knows where this is going, and a lot of us are out of work despite years of training to be good in this profession. So when I see someone on Twitter charging over $50 for a logo that clearly doesn't have many design principles involved into it, it brings up a lot of emotions. I've seen the VTubers that buy these say that of course their logo isn't great. They can't afford a $1,000 logo. But I know that as a design student, and even after I graduated, I was making money on the side making things like this for small businesses for the same price point, and I definitely was not alone. What's hard is that unlike big companies, your average VTuber or small business doesn't have somebody advising them about the benefits of good design. I'm hoping that this video helped in some way. Therefore, people with and without experience are being commissioned equally and compensated in the same way. This is not to say that you need a fancy education to do design, but when people who've at least studied design see some of this work, they start to feel like these customers are getting ripped off. What I find interesting is how many illustrators seek to improve by following art tutorials, how few logo designers in the VTubing space seem to have actually looked into learning design. And I can't stop you from selling bad logos. Seems like a lucrative business, so all the power to you. But if you want to provide these services, I would recommend putting some time into learning from others. Now let's look at the other side of this coin. VTuber logos in the context of just the world right now. VTuber logos are interesting because most content creators either don't have logos or don't really put too much importance on having one. I'm not an expert at why this is, but I know that a lot of indie VTubers place importance in following the culture of corporate VTubers who all happen to have logos. Even VTubers who don't plan to profit and are going into this more as a hobby often feel like getting a logo is a part of the whole experience, along with making elaborate schedules and even sometimes merch that they're just completely breaking even on. Kind of a tangent here, but this reminds me a bit of the cosplay scene that I was in 2 years ago. People were shocked that I didn't have a cosplay business card or a public Instagram or a website. For me, I was doing it just as a hobby, but when I talked to other hobby people who said they didn't want to become professional, they did have all these things. Nowadays, it seems like a lot of the hobbies include the incorporation of professional elements, even if there's no intention to go pro. Again, I don't know why this is, but two possible reasons may be that we are in a world where anyone could blow up at any second, even if you don't plan on becoming professional. Who knows what could happen? Number two is that part of the joy in these hobbies is that people actually enjoy cosplaying a professional, which there's no shame in. In fact, maybe there's something empowering in saying, hey, I'm not even here to make money. I just want the fun stuff without any responsibility. For indie VTubers who are trying to make this their career, it is kind of great for a small business owner to essentially speak the language and a visual sense of the business that's making the money, the companies. And because these big VTuber companies are making the same logo mistakes that everyone else is, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe VTubers exist in a niche cultural bubble where all their logos exist in relation to one another, but not the outside world of design. And if you expect your audience to just be people in this sphere, maybe you're fine. Designers will stay confused at this, but you're not designing for them. You're designing for people who know and love VTubers. As I said before, a lot of content creators get by fine without a logo ever. We're in an age where brand needs really moved past logos. Nowadays, our brand is often our face, or just in general, the way we look, the way we talk, the way we edit. And a lot of these things just show up way more often for VTubers than something like a logo. But if you do want a logo or to make a logo that does bring the traditional VTuber logo to the next level and really develops on what designers have built, hopefully this video was a good start. I will be linking some resources in the description. Every indie VTuber logo used in this video is used with the permission of the VTuber and the designer. This is not meant to harass anyone, but to explain my perspective as a designer. This was also not meant to be a specific critique session on any of these logos, because that would have taken way longer and also been a completely different video. And if you want to know what my work looks like, you can take a look at my logo. Not super complex, not saying yours has to be simple, but I just felt like it wouldn't show up very much in my day-to-day VTubing career. And if you want to see my professional work, I'm sorry, I don't let anybody hunting me down on LinkedIn. Would love to keep these things separate. How do you feel about VTuber logos after hearing all of this? Should they stay the same? Would you change your approach in commissioning or designing them? Or do they matter at all? If you like this video or want to hear more of my art rants, story times, or just me singing weird songs, please like and subscribe. You can also follow my Twitter in the description if you want your work or opinions to be part of any future videos. Thanks for listening!